Powell River.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy to be here today as a seniors critic for the NDP to talk about Bill C-295, an act to amend the criminal code targeted at the neglect of vulnerable adults. And this bill would do two things. First, it would amend the criminal code to create a specific offence for long-term care facilities, their owners and their managers, to fail to provide the necessities of life to residents of the facilities. And second, it would allow the court to make an order prohibiting the owners and managers of such facilities from being, through employment or volunteering, in charge of or in a position of trust or authority towards vulnerable adults, and to consider as an aggravating factor for the purpose of sentencing the fact that an organization failed to perform the legal duty that it owed to a vulnerable adult. Mr. Speaker, I am going to be in support of this bill. We know and we saw dreadful outcomes during the pandemic. So many seniors across this country faced with challenges that we cannot imagine, and then deaths beyond our imagination. I think it's really important as we remember this time to remember the men and women in uniform who served this country, who were sent in to some of these long-term care facilities and saw things that they were horrified to see in their own country. Mr. Speaker, I think it's really important to understand that when we ask our military to step up for us, they are used to stepping up outside of our country in these kind of circumstances. To be in this country and see seniors that had died just because of neglect, because they were dehydrated, this is Canada and that should never happen. And those folks did a huge service to us and something that I hope they never have to do in their own country again. So we know that when you are aging, and Mr. Speaker, I think it's also important to point out that the vast majority of seniors never enter long-term care. I think that's important. I hear from the seniors advocate in British Columbia all the time. Remember, most people stay at home and that's where they end their lives. But when we have seniors moving into a facility like this, families and loved ones need to know that that person is safe and that those standards are in place so that it's something that they can trust in. And we know, actually, Mr. Speaker, that sometimes families move their loved one to be closer to them from one province or territory to another. And what's surprising is the standards are different in each part of this country, which really leaves increased vulnerability. We know, and I appreciate, I'm going to say I appreciate, that the government did table some long-term care standards. But the thing that was terrifying to me is that they're voluntary. You know, a lot of good work was done into looking at those standards, making sure that they made sense for long-term care, and now we just see that they're voluntary. And this is something that worries me because it provides a huge risk to seniors and to the people who love them most. You know, we see again and again loved ones doing the best that they can. And if they live far away or there's any kind of challenge, knowing that their loved one is in a long-term care facility not getting the support that they want to see makes people feel ill. There was something important. I'm going to quote from Candace Rennick, from CUPE's National Secretary Treasurer. She said this: voluntary standards did not protect the 17,000 residents of long-term care homes who have died so far because of COVID-19. Canadians want better protection for seniors. This country needs standards that are backed up by the force of law. People need to know that their loved ones will spend their last days living with dignity and with respect. They need to know that there will be penalties and consequences for long-term care service providers that don't follow the rules. If all we have in this country is a national voluntary standard, there will never be the level of accountability that I think Canadians want to see. So this bill will amend the criminal code, but I'm afraid that it will not do all that it must to protect seniors. We need more long-term support for them and a practice of having more accountability. So, Mr. Speaker, what this really means to me is when seniors die in this situation, there need to be actual charges laid. And we know we're not seeing that. What we're seeing is families taking on long-term care facilities, and that isn't right. There needs to be a process, and we need to start having charges laid. That is a real deterrent. Graham Webb, Executive Director and former staff lawyer of the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly, has called the criminal code amendments a very viable approach. However, he said, and I quote, "I'm really not aware of a single charge ever having been laid for the neglect of a long-term care resident. I think it's important that the criminal justice system be able to respond when we see such flagrant cases of institutional abuse and neglect of older adults," end quote. I think that's startling. So even if we see a minor change to the code, it's still not fulfilling the other end, which is the actual movement towards laying those charges and holding people accountable. Mr. Speaker, you know just as well as I do that when people are held to account, other people observing start paying attention. And I think it's shameful in this country that seniors are so vulnerable that they can be sacrificed without a thought. They built our country. We owe them so much more, and we owe them dignity. You know, one of the things that I found particularly painful in my role as a seniors critic is how many loved ones have come to my door and talked about how hard they worked to try to look after their loved one who was in a seniors facility. And because they had to work, because they had children, they couldn't always be there the way they wanted to. And then when they would get in to visit, they would see things that would horrify them, and they fought in that system the best that they could. They fought with everything that they had. But now that their loved one is gone, the pain is so raw, they don't want to talk about it because of the guilt they feel. They feel guilt because our system is broken, and that is wrong, and that is why we must fix this. So to me, it goes back to this simple reality. We need to see the long-term care standards in legislation. We need to raise the bar. And you know what? I get it. Every province and territory wants to do their own thing. I respect that, but let's make this the bar. And if any province and territory wants to be higher than that bar, good for them. But let's make sure that no senior in all of Canada falls below this, that no family is in a position that they're thinking of moving their loved one from one province to another simply so that they get better care. That is ridiculous. I think Canadians need to listen to those in the front lines. For example, Natalie Mera, Executive Director of the Ontario Health Coalition, has noted that there has been no consequence whatsoever for abuse and neglect that was exposed during the pandemic, or for the needless death of residents due to poor infection control and non-COVID-19 reasons, such as dehydration and starvation. How could a senior be starved to death in this country? This is Canada. She further noted, and I quote, "I think we need to search our conscience if the lives of the elderly are not worth a formal government bill and real change with teeth." So I hope that as we vote on this bill, and hopefully people will support it because it's a small change in the right direction, I hope we all think about our commitment to the people who built this country, to people who, as they age, are increasingly vulnerable, to hardworking families that are doing everything they can to support that loved one, and the fact that we still do not have legislation that will have teeth to them so that we can make sure to support seniors as they age. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to say, as a person who represents a rural and remote community, we also have to recognize small communities often see their loved ones go far away to get long-term care. So they have to travel a big distance, which means they can't be there. So let's all fight to make sure that wherever your loved one is, they are safe. Thank you.